Okay. Hi, everyone. As I said, my name's Rob from Imperial College. I'm a medical doctor by background. I got into blockchain when it was sort of new and emerging back in, well, when it first hit the headlines back in 2013. I read the white paper and something just pinged. I thought this is going to be big. There's going to be something that this is useful for in almost every walk of life. And it turns out that quite luckily the government believes the same thing. We got one of the most forward-thinking governments in this country, looking at deploying blockchain technologies across a vast number of sectors for improved data security, data liquidity, and things like that. I was initially going to give you a little talk about some of our thoughts at the centre on how this can be used specifically for healthcare, but when I heard that we had someone from Guard Time out there who's actually doing this with a real government, I thought, let's leave them to speak about that part. I'll just do the very intro talk about what is blockchain, because I've also heard a few of you may want that talk. So without further ado, we are combination of broad skills. We've got someone who's a professor in computer science, Kathy Mulligan, who discusses these issues at government level and is also in telecoms and 5G and all that sort of stuff. We've got Melik and myself are qualified medical doctors, Melik on the public health side, myself in bioengineering devices side, and Ian Stewart, who is a Bitcoin millionaire who understands all the tech far better than I ever will. So I'm going to adapt parts of his talk because it's one of the best intros I've seen, and it's mashed a little bit with some of my talk as well. So we do fundamental research in these technologies, and we want to educate the next group of developers coming through. And it's been an incredibly popular stream. 20% of all students at college choose to do a project. 20% of all students in the computer science department choose to do a blockchain-related project. And these are some of the more successful ones. We've got a spin-out here and then two very successful demonstrators here. So what is a blockchain? This is a blockchain, okay? Series of records locked together. Let's actually take a step back. Let's talk about blockchains without blocks and without chains. What are the fundamentals that we're dealing with here? We are dealing, well, when it was first invented by Mr. Satoshi Nakamoto way back in 2009, it was quite clear that he wanted us to re-examine our relationship with banks and to flatten the transaction landscape. So I want to give you money. I can take cash out of my pocket, put it in your hand, and it is an atomic instant transfer of value from myself to yourself. No one else can censor that transaction, and yet you know that it is finalized and true at the moment it's occurred. We cannot do that in the digital world. Instead, we have to go through intermediaries. These are banks. They facilitate these transfers. Now, it's fine if you're transferring large amounts of money between countries. You want a bit of trust in the system, and the banks are established as the points of trust and authority. But why can't we transfer £1 million cross-border as easily as we can transfer 5p between person? So that's where Satoshi Nakamoto came in and said, I've got this invention. I've got this way that we can get rid of this intermediary and return to a person-to-person transfer where the network validates that the transfer has occurred without a single trusted third party in the center. Let's dive right into the core of what this is, the transaction itself. So in a Bitcoin transaction, to use Ian Stewart's language, we've got these bubbling ephemeral fonts of Bitcoins coming up from the ground somewhere, okay? So we've got time going in this direction, so that's way back in the history of time, that's way up in the future of time. We've got Bitcoins bubbling up from time somewhere. And these are in specific denominations. And I want to create a transaction, so I need to suck them into my transaction, some of these little pipes of Bitcoin that are there, and then I want to spit them out in other directions. Now, there's no reason that this transaction format couldn't have been adopted by normal banks, you know, or for the past however many years of human history that we've been dealing in money and transactions. Instead, we say, okay, I've got a bank of 1,000 and I want to give you 900 and I want to keep 100 for myself. Whereas in Bitcoin, you take the full 1,000 and then you break it back up again. You have to consume every previous transaction. You have to consume all of these inputs to create new outputs. And there's an extra little one. If the mathematically minded of you may have seen that this didn't add up properly. That's because there's a little extra bit here that goes off to the miners who you're paying to actually do this transaction and include it in the network. Right, so that's the structure of a transaction. You've got inputs, they're all sucked in, they're spat back out as new outputs to new targets, new people, and the amounts are always consumed in total. So if we were to look at a network streaming these transactions in time, we would see transactions popping in here and there, A paying B, C paying D, E paying F, but the connections between them from the beginning of time may start looking a little bit complicated, and you may start see patterns emerging here where you've got inputs being sucked in, consumed in the transaction, born back out again as new outputs. So we've got this is there's no reason that a traditional banking system couldn't use this format for their transaction network. We don't because it's a bit inefficient, it's a bit clunky, but there's no reason it couldn't. So far, there's no inventive blockchaininess here. So instead, let's bundle up some of these transactions. Let's say in this epoch of time, I've seen these transactions. Okay, that's one epoch completed. That's now a block. Here's another epoch of time. I've seen these transactions occur. I'm going to bundle these up. That's another block. We're starting to see blocks emerge. And what's interesting about blocks is that they're ordered in time, but still they could be deleted. Okay? There's no reason that someone couldn't just lie and delete a block from the sequence, or edit a block's contents, or even swap the sequence of blocks in time. Okay? A bit more subtle manipulation of events. So we want to lock them together. And how do we do this? Well, it's quite simple, really. We use some 1400s technology. We say, okay, we've got double entry bookkeeping, and we've added up all the sums on this block, okay, and all the sums come to this number, and I'm now going to use that sum to start the next page of my ledger. And then I'm going to use that and take all the sums here, and then I'm going to use that to start the next page of the ledger. So the history of the previous block is encoded in the current block, and that will happen as you go forward and forward and forward. Some marker, some token, some mathematical digest of the previous block is included in the current block, and then that rolls forward and so on, so that you can always see the time sequence linking them together. But again, with supercomputing power out there, it's not hard to manipulate a single transaction in that stream to recalculate the sum total of that one block that it would have been in, and now to encode that and create a new chain off it. Okay, so far we've got a way of locking these blocks together, but it's hard to do this in a distributed fashion where anyone with a large amount of computing power could be editing your transactions in secret and redistributing them, sending them out again and saying, no, these are the true blocks here. And look, I've got these true blocks because all the numbers match up. You can see they're falling in sequence. So there's yet the inventiveness, the inventive part hasn't yet happened here. We've got transactions, suck in inputs, send out outputs. We've got them bundled into blocks. We've got blocks linked together in time using this mechanism. Okay, couple of little extras here. How do you make sure that only certain people can use certain transaction inputs? So this is old cryptography. There's nothing new in the invention here. We've got a database, and we've got transaction records within this database. Sorry, skipped ahead in my little talk. So to save the database, we might make an on-site backup, and to make sure it's really safe, we might make a couple of off-site distributed backups. We may send them across the country, we may link them together with internet technology so that they're always continually synchronized. So my record of all the blocks in sequence are the same as your record of all the blocks in sequence, and yours, and so on and so on. So that if anyone sends a transaction, it's instantly copied and replicated across the entire system. Not that hard to do. This is the part that's interesting. This is what stops me from spending your bitcoins and you from spending her bitcoins and so on. We use public key cryptography, so that every transaction input, you need to sign that you own this input before you're allowed to suck it into your transaction. And then when you spit it out again in new outputs, you no longer control those destinations unless you send it to one that you created beforehand. So instead, I can now send all my Bitcoins to 2 different people and have no ownership of those coins anymore, because they're sent to new key addresses that I do not own the matching private key for. This is what's been securing our bank accounts since the 1970s. Public-private key cryptography secures all the internet, secures lots of the nation's secrets. So if there was a fundamental problem with this asymmetric key cryptography, it would have caused massive havoc by now. Yes, certain algorithms do get cracked over time, but these can be evolved and these can change to keep up with the latest technology. So you can see here that this gentleman may possess all those inputs, and he may be able to distribute it to these 2 separate people as outputs, and yet these other participants in the system would never know who any of these actual individuals were. All you see is an address. You just see a key that the money has been transferred to, the ownership has been transferred to. So we've got a final mixture. We've got 1970s public-private key cryptography. We've got 1980s networking technology. We've got 1400s bookkeeping, okay, to create something that isn't new or amazing, but we do have a secret magic ingredient. And this comes from the 1990s. This is the bit that makes blockchain. And this magic ingredient is what's called proof of work. It allows us to create this structure in a distributed fashion without a single point of trusted control. Who here is good at Rubik's Cube? Now, when someone's good at Rubik's Cube, how long does it take you to solve Rubik's Cube?
It's like 2 minutes.
Okay, that's pretty good at Rubik's Cube, I've got to say. Let's imagine you weren't in the room and we were all pretty rubbish at Rubik's Cube and we all had to just hack away at the Rubik's Cube. You could spend 20 minutes solving the Rubik's Cube, and yet when you showed it to her, she would know instantly that that was true, that that was correct. It's a one-way mathematical problem. It's very hard to do in this direction, but it's very easy to validate in that direction. It's essentially what these cryptographic hash functions are. You are throwing out guesses, millions and millions of guesses at the answer every second. In fact, in the Bitcoin network, I think it's something like 10 to the 18 guesses per second being thrown at the answer. But when someone says, I've now got the right answer, I've guessed the right answer, it's very, very easy for the rest of the network to prove that they did guess the right answer. So the guessing itself is hard, the validation of the guess is trivial. But it takes time in the real world. Those 10 to the 18 guesses per second only result in a correct answer in Bitcoin once every 10 minutes. So someone had to do that guessing for 10 minutes on average before they got the correct guess. They then send out that guess, everyone validates it, and then they get to put their stamp on the block and say, right, this is my block that I've sealed up with transactions and I'm sending to the rest of you. And as a reward for securing the network by finding that block, you're going to give me a bit of money. So that's how new money is created in Bitcoin, because there's no central bank to distribute the cash. It's only found randomly by people guessing these numbers in the system. So this proof of work now locks blocks together. Why is this cunning? What makes this so cunning? Why does this allow a distributed system? Well, let's imagine here that the network in total is busy working 10 to the 18 guesses per second being thrown at this new block that we want to, this new puzzle that we want to solve to decree the next block to win our prize money. If I don't like the fact that I sent you £1 million in this block here, I have to unwind the history of the chain. So I have to go to the previous block. I have to reproduce a piece of work. I then have to give you out my parallel block, okay, my separate block. Now this is a totally different piece of work from this piece of work. You cannot use a previous guess to help you with a new guess. It's complete guess. I produce a new parallel block. I then have to produce another parallel block to reach the tip of the growing chain. I then have to beat the growing chain. So I have to produce 3 times as much work as the network has to produce one single piece of work just to unwind by one transaction block. So you can now see that it is extremely computationally costly to unwind history in this system. And because this is a distributed system where everyone has identical copies of the entire record that they can validate from the beginning of the history until present, it means that no one can insert transactions, no one can delete transactions, no one can alter the time sequence of transactions. For the first time in a distributed system, we have a way of having true verifiable data with history. So that is our final mixture that gives us blockchain technology. Just going to spend a minute talking about what some of the potentials are of this methodology, because we have here a synchronized database. It's been up since it was created in January 2009. Think of how many other databases don't go down over that length of time and yet have continuous accessibility. You know, we're talking 6 nines of uptime here, 7 nines maybe even. I haven't done the calculation. It's very, very unlikely in other databasing systems. You've got access control by those keys, so you can say, there are some other funky things in Bitcoin as well, where you can say, oh, you have threshold signatures. We need 2 out of 3 keys to sign to unleash this transaction and things like this. You've also got irreversible time stamping, which is uncensorable because no one can guess who is going to guess the next block. If you want to shut down Bitcoin, you would have to delete the copy of the blockchain off everyone's computers and shut down every single person guessing the next block. That's the only way to stop Bitcoin. That's what's got the banks scared. So let's talk a little bit about the use cases. We've got money-like uses, which was the primary invention. You know, that's why it was invented. We've got notarization in a distributed system, and we've got the potential for smart contracting on some of the newer platforms. So money-like uses, well, I think you've guessed here, I send you something, as long as we both agree that that has value, that is money. I mean, you've got historic tribes using tea as money, you've got people using stones as money, cowrie shells. What is money? You know? And you've got a number of coins that have emerged. Bitcoin being the first one, Litecoin then saying, well, we've now got the code of Bitcoin because it's public. And you can all go and see the code of Bitcoin. It's there on GitHub. What we're going to do is we're going to take it, rename it, change a few of the variables, and we're going to call it Litecoin. They also changed the mining algorithm so that you couldn't just guess it with the same Bitcoin computing. And then Monero, which is an emerging popular one because it's designed for privacy. It's designed for total privacy so that you can no longer get a key address and track that key historically to see what's happened to it. In fact, every transaction is pretty much invisible, yet it's recorded in public and verifiable. It's an interesting concept. Notarization is just the use of the timestamping mechanism within the blockchain. So you have a transaction, but you add some metadata to that transaction. Because every transaction has a little bit of extra space that you can add some metadata into. Different blockchains allow you different amounts of metadata. In Bitcoin, I think it's something like 80 bytes per transaction you can have as metadata. And so you may say, well, look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to encode a plain text that says patent 25251 lodged by Rob Learney at this time. And then because it's in the blockchain, it's publicly visible that this metadata exists at this time, it couldn't have existed before, so that must be the timestamp at when it was created. And these are some of the services out there, and we're going to hear from Guard Time shortly, I believe. Everledger say that they've got, is it 60 million diamonds on the blockchain now? Can't remember, 10 million diamonds, 60 million diamonds. They take a diamond, they do a 3D scan of a diamond, they record all the characteristics of it, they take its certificate, they encode that, they stick it on their blockchain so that you can get your certificate and you can validate that this diamond is physically the one encoded by the certificate at this time in this location by this person whose key signed the transaction. Pretty interesting stuff. And then finally, this new emerging world of smart contracts where you can actually encode transactional activity, transactional behavior inside a blockchain so that you can actually read the code on everyone who participates in the system can see the computer code, can see it execute, and can see the result. So it's public computing, publicly visible computing. So, you know, if price of shares equals X, sell half of them, you know, something like that. People are coming up with much, much smarter contracting systems based on this. I'm a little wary to call it fully programmable, even though they promise that it is. We'll see what use cases emerge. And these are a couple of the smart contracting platforms that are out there. Ethereum's the premier one that people have probably heard of. Ethereum tokens recently jumped up to $30 a unit, which is pretty nice. I didn't have any at the time, but hey, that's the way things go. And Corda is this one that emerged from the consortium of 70 of the world's largest banks. They wrote this blockchain technology, they put it out there as a white paper and publicly available code, and they said use it. And it's now been folded into this body called Hyperledger, which we can talk about at a later time. So, thank you very much.